Then a flight attendant stopped a man in the aisle. He was dressed simply, dark jacket, small carry-on, no urgency. She looked at his boarding pass once, then again her expression changed. "Sir, this seat is not available." The man looked at the number above the row. "It matches." People nearby glanced over and looked away. Another attendant arrived, short conversation, no explanation, just repeated instructions. "You need to move." The man stayed calm. "There may be a mistake." A few passengers started recording. Someone whispered that he probably booked the wrong cabin. The attendants did not lower their voices. The pilot entered from the cockpit after being called. He listened for less than 10 seconds, then made a decision in front of everyone. "If you refuse instructions, you will leave this aircraft." The man stood silently, picked up his bag. Then one attendant reached for his shoulder. He stepped back. The pilot moved forward. Hands met. A sharp sound. The cabin went completely quiet. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The man touched his face once, looked around the aircraft, and said only, "Understood." Then he sat back down. No anger, no argument. No one noticed him send a single message. They chose the wrong person. They just didn't know it yet. Only a few airport staff remained near the desk, collecting scanners and closing paperwork. Through the glass, the aircraft sat still under white floodlights, connected to the terminal by the narrow bridge. Inside the cabin, passengers were settling into the familiar rhythm of departure. Overhead bins opened and closed. Seatbelts clicked. People adjusted neck pillows, checked messages, and glanced at departure times. In the forward cabin, service had already started in small ways. Jackets were being hung. Water was offered. Quiet conversations filled the space. Everything looked normal. That was why nobody noticed him at first. He entered without urgency. One carry-on, dark jacket, no visible status symbols, no assistant, no loud phone call. He paused just inside the aircraft door long enough to let another passenger pass before stepping forward. The first flight attendant at the entrance gave him the same quick professional smile she had given everyone else. Then she looked at the boarding pass. Her eyes stayed there a second longer. Her expression did not change immediately. But something small shifted. She looked up at him, back down, then toward the premium cabin. "Good evening." He nodded. "Good evening." She handed the pass back. No welcome, no direction to the seat, just a brief pause before stepping aside. He continued into the cabin. Nothing happened, not yet. He moved slowly down the aisle, counting rows with quiet attention. Passengers barely looked at him. A man in row 2 glanced once and returned to his tablet. Someone else watched him for half a second and assumed he belonged farther back. No one said anything. The passenger stopped beside seat 3A. He checked the number, placed his carry-on in the overhead compartment, then sat down. Window seat, simple movement, no hesitation. Across the aisle, another passenger looked over, then looked again, not because of anything unusual, only because people notice small things in premium cabins, who belongs, who does not. The man sat upright and looked out the window. No headphones, no drink, no attempt to make conversation. The cabin continued moving around him. One attendant passed, then another. Neither stopped. A few minutes later, the same attendant from the aircraft door returned. She slowed near row 3, looked once at the seat, kept walking, then stopped, turned around. She smiled again. This time the smile looked procedural. "Excuse me, sir." The man looked up. "Yes." She held a tablet. "May I see your boarding pass again?" He handed it over immediately. No reaction. She checked, looked at the screen, checked again. A pause, long enough to become visible. Nearby passengers noticed. The attendant lowered her voice, but not enough. "Can you wait one moment?" He nodded. "Of course." She walked forward, not toward economy, toward the galley. Another attendant joined her. They spoke quietly. One looked back, then both looked. Passengers notice attention faster than sound. People nearby began forming conclusions before hearing facts. Wrong seat, upgrade problem, last-minute change. Someone sat in the wrong section. Nobody asked, nobody helped. The man remained still, hands folded, looking out the window. A child farther back asked loudly, "Is he in trouble?" The parent immediately whispered for silence. One of the attendants returned, professional expression, tablet held close. "Sir," he turned. "There appears to be an issue." He waited. She continued. "This seat may not be available." He looked up at the seat number above him, then at her. "It matches my pass." She gave a polite smile. "We just need to verify." No accusation, not yet, but something had changed. The conversation no longer sounded like verification. It sounded like correction. Passengers nearby became interested in ways people never admit. Eyes stayed down, attention stayed up. The man reached into his jacket, not quickly. He removed a passport. Placed it beside the boarding pass. No words, she looked at neither, only at the tablet. "Thank you." Then she left again. This time she did not return alone. As the second attendant approached beside her, the cabin noise seemed to lower without actually changing. People sensed movement before understanding it. The man remained seated, calm, patient, almost detached, like someone waiting for weather to pass. The second attendant stopped beside row 3, looked at him, then at the screen, and asked, "Sir, can you explain how you came to be assigned this seat?" The question was ordinary, but the wording was not. For the first time, the passenger looked directly at her. His expression did not change. He answered simply, "I boarded the aircraft and sat where I was assigned." The attendants exchanged a quick look, small, controlled, but visible. One of them smiled again and said, "Understood." The kind of answer that usually means the conversation is only beginning. The aircraft doors had not closed yet. Outside, baggage loading stopped. Inside, people pretended not to listen. And in seat 3A, the man folded his boarding pass once and waited. The second flight attendant remained beside the row, not blocking the aisle, not exactly confronting him, but standing close enough that everyone nearby understood something unusual was happening. The first attendant stayed half a step behind her, tablet held against her chest. Passengers returned their attention to phones and screens with the careful performance people use when they want to watch without being seen watching. The man in seat 3A stayed still. No irritation, no visible embarrassment, just waiting. The second attendant spoke again. "Could I see your boarding pass one more time?" He handed it over immediately. She examined it, then looked at the screen, then at him. Nothing appeared wrong, but she did not hand it back. She asked another question. "Did someone assist you with boarding?" His eyes moved to hers. "No. Were there any changes made at the gate?" "Not that I was told." She nodded once. No acknowledgement, no explanation, only more silence. A passenger across the aisle lowered his tablet slightly. Another quietly removed one earbud. The first attendant leaned toward her colleague and whispered something. The second attendant looked at the seat number again, then at the man. Her tone remained professional, but colder now. "Sir, we may need you to move temporarily while we resolve this." He looked toward the empty seats around him, then back. "Where would you like me to sit?" The question was direct, not resistant. For a moment she seemed unprepared for agreement. She glanced toward the cabin entrance. "We'll advise in a moment." He nodded. "Okay." Again, no argument, no complaint. That should have ended it. Instead, uncertainty created a different problem. People expect conflict. When someone stays calm, others sometimes become more certain they must be right. The attendant stepped away again. This time they spoke longer. Another crew member joined, 3 people now, all looking occasionally toward row 3. No one came to speak to him. Passengers noticed. Conclusions started appearing. Someone behind him whispered, "Maybe he's in the wrong cabin." Another voice answered, "They usually catch that before boarding." A third said quietly, "Maybe he upgraded and there's confusion." Nobody asked the man. Nobody asked the crew. People prefer theories. The man remained by the window. Outside, ground lights reflected against the glass. Inside, boarding music continued. A routine departure, except for row 3. After another minute, the attendants returned. The first attendant extended the boarding pass, but did not release it immediately. "Sir, can I ask whether this ticket was purchased directly?" He looked at her. "Yes. Personally?" "Yes." A pause, then, "Do you travel often?" Nearby heads shifted almost invisibly. The question felt wrong, not offensive, just wrong. He answered, "Sometimes." She smiled politely, the kind that closes conversation rather than opens it. Then she handed the pass back, but she stayed there. The second attendant took over. "We have to ensure seating integrity before departure." He nodded. "I understand." She looked surprised again, no resistance, no pressure, nothing to push against, so she changed direction. "Would you mind explaining your destination today?" He looked at her for a second, then answered, "The same destination as everyone else." A few passengers nearby smiled quietly, not because it was clever, because it was calm. The attendant did not smile. She looked at him another second, then said, "Please remain available." He inclined his head. "Of course." They walked away, but this time they did not go to the galley. They moved directly toward the cockpit. Passengers noticed that. People always notice movement toward the cockpit. Conversation faded. No announcement, no explanation, just staff entering and exiting. 1 minute, then 2, then 3. The aircraft still had not pushed back. The seatbelt sign remained off. The man reached into his bag, removed a thin folder, placed it on his lap, did not open it, did not display anything, just rested one hand on it. A woman across the aisle finally spoke, softly, not intrusive. "Are you okay?" He turned. Gave a small, polite nod. "Yes." That was all. She looked like she wanted to say more. Instead, she turned away. The attendants returned. Their pace had changed. Less uncertainty, more certainty, which would have looked reassuring if anyone knew what they had decided. The second attendant stopped beside row 3. The first remained behind her. This time, she did not ask for the pass. She looked directly at him and said, "Sir, we need to resolve this before departure." The man looked up. His expression stayed calm. "What needs to be resolved?" She held eye contact, then said, "There appears to be inconsistency regarding your placement in this cabin." No explanation, no details, only the suggestion that he needed to justify being there. For the first time, the people watching stopped assuming there had been a mistake and started wondering whose mistake it actually was. The man looked at her quietly, then placed the folder back into his bag. He stood up, not because he was told. Not because he was leaving, just enough to face her directly, and asked, "Who would you like to verify it?" The attendants looked at each other, then toward the cockpit. One of them answered, "We're bringing someone." The words stayed in the air, "We're bringing someone." The sentence sounded ordinary, but inside an aircraft cabin, it changed the atmosphere immediately. Passengers stopped pretending not to watch. People looked without turning their heads. Phones remained in hands. Screens stayed unlocked. No one recorded yet, not openly. The man remained standing beside seat 3A. His carry-on stayed above him. His boarding pass remained folded in one hand. He did not ask who was coming. He did not sit back down. The attendants stepped away and positioned themselves near the galley, not guarding him, not escorting him, but creating the appearance that something required supervision. That appearance mattered. People respond to posture before facts. A passenger in row 4 quietly stood to use the restroom. One attendant redirected him. "Please wait a moment." The passenger looked confused, sat back down. That made more people notice. The cabin no longer felt delayed, it felt interrupted. The man stayed calm, hands relaxed, expression unchanged. He looked neither defensive nor offended, which strangely made him appear more unusual. One of the attendants returned alone. She stopped beside him. "Sir, could you step into the galley for a private conversation?" It sounded reasonable, but she had not lowered her voice. Half the cabin heard. He looked at the empty aisle, then back at her. "I'm comfortable speaking here." Her smile tightened slightly. "It would be easier privately." He nodded once. "I understand," then added, "but I prefer to remain in my assigned seat area." No challenge, no accusation, just a boundary. The attendant stood still. She had expected refusal or compliance. Not polite refusal. Those are harder. She glanced back toward the front, then changed tone. "Sir, I'm trying to avoid making this uncomfortable." A few passengers heard that and interpreted the sentence the way she intended, like she was managing someone difficult. The man looked at her. His voice stayed even. "I appreciate that." Nothing more. The conversation ended without ending. She stepped back. Another attendant approached, this one older, more experienced. She carried no tablet. Only confidence. She stopped directly in front of him. "Good evening." He nodded. "Good evening," she smiled. "Apparently we have some confusion." He waited. She continued. "Can you tell me whether you normally travel in this cabin?" There was a pause, not because of the question, because of how quietly it landed. Nearby passengers heard it. A man in row 2 slowly lowered his newspaper. The seated passenger answered, "Today I do." The attendant gave a small laugh, professional, controlled, not warm. "I'm asking because these situations happen." He nodded. "I'm sure they do." She folded her hands. "Sometimes passengers misunderstand upgrades." He looked at her. "No upgrade." She waited. He said nothing else. That should have ended the assumption. Instead, she asked, "And nobody accompanied you?" He looked at her for a second, then answered, "No." Again, no explanation, no defense. The attendant looked around briefly, aware of a tension, then said, "Would you mind showing confirmation of purchase?" For the first time, he did not immediately move, not resistance, just stillness. Then he asked, "Is that standard procedure?" Her expression changed slightly, not anger, adjustment. "It can be." He nodded, then asked, "For everyone?" She held eye contact. Nobody nearby moved. The question was simple, but suddenly visible. She answered carefully, "We verify when necessary." He looked at her for another second, then reached into his jacket, removed a thin leather wallet, opened it. Removed a receipt, handed it over. She looked, then stopped, looked again. Her expression remained neutral, but she handed it back faster than expected. No comment, no acknowledgement. She stepped aside. Passengers noticed. Questions changed direction. The woman across the aisle looked at him once, then looked at the attendants. People were no longer asking, "Why is he being checked?" They were beginning to ask, "Why does this still seem unresolved?" The older attendant returned to the galley. Another quiet conversation, shorter this time, more serious. One attendant looked toward the cockpit, another nodded. Someone pressed the interphone. Passengers could not hear, but they could see. The man remained standing, then slowly sat back down, not defeated, not uncomfortable, just done participating. He looked out the window again. A child several rows back asked, "Why won't the plane leave?" No one answered. A moment later, the cockpit door opened. Conversation in the cabin dropped immediately. A figure stepped out. Uniform, measured pace, not rushed, not smiling. The pilot looked first at the attendants, then toward row 3. One attendant walked forward and spoke quietly to him. He listened for less than 10 seconds. He did not look at any documents, did not ask for clarification, just nodded once. Then started walking down the aisle. Passengers straightened instinctively. The pilot stopped beside seat 3, looked down. The man looked up. The pilot said calmly, "Sir, I understand there's an issue." The passenger answered, "I'm trying to understand that too." The pilot looked at the attendants, then back at him, and asked, "Can you stand for me?" The man looked at him, then slowly stood. The cabin became completely silent because everyone suddenly understood this was no longer a seating discussion, and nobody knew why. The pilot stood in the aisle, one hand lightly resting on the seat back, not aggressive, not relaxed. The posture of someone used to being obeyed. The man stood across from him, no raised voice, no visible frustration, only two people standing in a quiet aircraft while everyone else tried not to stare. The pilot gave a short nod. "Thank you." Then he asked, "Can I see your boarding pass?" The man handed it over immediately. The pilot looked at it, briefly, not long enough to study details, then passed it back. His attention shifted to the attendants. One asked quietly, "Should we proceed?" Anne heard it. Passengers nearby heard it. Proceed with what? Nobody explained. The pilot looked back at the passenger. His tone stayed calm. "Sir, I want to resolve this quickly." The man nodded. "So do I," the pilot continued. "There appears to be uncertainty about your seating assignment." The passenger answered, "It appears that way." No challenge, no irritation, just agreement. The pilot seemed to expect more, an explanation, defensiveness, something. Instead, he got silence, so he moved forward. "Can you explain how you came to occupy this seat?" Several passengers looked up immediately. The wording landed badly. Occupy, not assigned, not selected, occupy. The man answered evenly. "I boarded and sat where my pass directed me." The pilot nodded once but did not respond to the answer. Instead, "Do you have additional documentation?" A pause. The man looked at him. What documentation? The pilot gestured lightly. Purchase confirmation, upgrade record, anything that clarifies. The passenger held eye contact, then asked quietly, "Has there been an error?" The pilot answered immediately. "We're determining that." The man nodded. "Then perhaps determine it." No edge in the words, no challenge, just a sentence, but something changed. The attendants became still. The pilot looked at him another second, then asked, "Are you refusing to cooperate?" Several passengers shifted. That sentence changed everything. The man answered calmly. "No." The pilot waited. The man continued, "I've provided my boarding pass, answered your questions, remained in my seat." The pilot gave a small nod, then said, "I'm asking because delays affect everyone." Passengers heard that, and now the pressure moved. Nobody wants to be the reason a flight leaves late. The implications settled into the cabin. The man looked around briefly, then back. "I don't want to delay anyone," the pilot replied. "Then help us move forward." The passenger looked at him, a long second. Then asked, "What exactly are you asking me to do?" The question should have helped. Instead, it exposed something. No one had actually asked him to do anything specific. The attendants exchanged quick looks. The pilot answered, "I'm asking you to step off the aircraft temporarily while we review." The sentence arrived cleanly, professional, reasonable, but it changed the entire meaning of the last 15 minutes. Not verify, not wait. Leave. The man looked at him, then asked, "Am I being removed?" The pilot answered immediately, "No." A pause. "Not removed, temporarily relocated." The cabin stayed silent. The passenger nodded once, then asked, "Based on what?" No answer came immediately. The pilot's expression remained controlled. He looked at the attendants. One stepped in. "There are inconsistencies," the man asked. "What inconsistencies?" No answer. Another pause, long enough to become visible. The pilot spoke. "Sir, we do not need agreement. We need cooperation." The sentence landed harder than intended. The man looked at him, then slowly reached into his jacket. Several people tensed. He removed only his phone, unlocked it, looked at the screen, typed something short, no expression, locked the phone, put it away, then looked at the pilot and said, "Understood." The pilot nodded. "Thank you." The man reached up, removed his carry-on, held it beside him. Passengers relaxed. It looked finished. The attendant stepped slightly aside, creating space. Man moved into the aisle, then stopped, turned calmly toward the pilot and asked one final question. "Before I leave, who authorized this decision?" The pilot looked at him. His answer came without hesitation. "I did." The passenger held his gaze only for a moment, then nodded. No anger, no warning, no visible reaction. He adjusted the handle of his bag, started walking. Then an attendant moved closer to guide him. Her hand reached toward his shoulder, not forcefully, not violently. Routine. But unexpected. He turned instinctively. She lost balance. The pilot reacted immediately, stepped in, reached out, hands met. A sharp sound cut through the cabin, not loud, but unmistakable. Silence, complete silence. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The passenger stopped, slowly turned back. One hand touched the side of his face. No expression, no outrage. The pilot looked frozen for half a second, like even he had not expected the moment to happen. Passengers stared. Phones appeared. The man lowered his hand, looked once around the cabin, then quietly said, "Please close the door," and sat back down in seat 3A. Nobody moved. The aircraft cabin stayed suspended in a kind of silence that did not belong on airplanes. No announcements, no service, no routine noise, only air circulation and the distant sound of baggage equipment outside. The man sat back in seat 3, a carry-on beside his legs, hands resting lightly together. He did not look at the pilot, did not look at the attendants. He did not touch his face again. The pilot remained standing in the aisle, not shocked, not panicked, but caught in the strange moment after something becomes irreversible. One attendant stepped closer, quietly. "Captain," he raised one hand slightly. "Not now." Passengers looked everywhere except directly at the front. People suddenly became very interested in seat pockets, window shades, phones, anything except acknowledging what had happened. But everyone had seen it. No one could honestly say otherwise. The woman across the aisle looked toward the man. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She finally asked, "Do you need anything?" He turned to her. His expression stayed neutral. "No, thank you, nothing else." She nodded and looked away. The pilot took one breath, then spoke professionally. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We're resolving a boarding issue." No one responded. The announcement ended, too short, too controlled. The pilot turned back to the passenger. "Sir, may I speak with you privately?" The man looked at him, then answered, "I'm comfortable here." Same words as before, same tone. The pilot stood still. A few passengers noticed that. He had heard that answer earlier. Now it sounded different, not resistance, documentation. The pilot lowered his voice. "I don't believe this situation benefits anyone." The man nodded once. "I agree." The pilot waited. The man said nothing further. The pilot looked briefly toward the galley, then back. "Would you step off voluntarily so we can reset?" The passenger looked at him, then asked, "Has the issue been identified?" No answer. The pilot replied, "We're reviewing." The passenger nodded. "Then review." Silence again, no anger, no accusation, just calm. That calm started becoming uncomfortable because people expect emotion after public embarrassment. Without emotion, attention moves somewhere else, toward process, toward facts, toward accountability. One row back, a passenger quietly lowered his phone. Another did not. A third passenger whispered, "I recorded from when the captain came out." Someone answered, "Keep that." The attendants heard. Their posture changed, not fear, awareness. One attendant quietly walked to the front galley. Another disappeared behind the curtain. The pilot stayed. The passenger reached into his bag. Several people noticed immediately. He removed, not documents, a charging cable. Connected his phone. Placed it face down. Opened the thin folder that had remained closed all this time. Inside, neatly arranged papers, no logos visible, no dramatic labels. He took out one page, read it, returned it, closed the folder. The woman across the aisle noticed something in the corner of one document, a seal, official looking. She looked again. He had already put it away. She said nothing. The pilot finally spoke. "May I ask your name?" The passenger looked at him, a small pause. Then, "You already have it." Pilot stood still. One attendant quietly said, "We only checked the booking." The passenger looked at her, no change in expression, then simply, "I know." Nobody understood why that sentence felt heavier than it should. A moment later, the cockpit door opened, not from inside. A ground operations employee stepped onto the aircraft. That almost never happened after boarding. The employee walked directly to the pilot, spoke quietly, handed over something. The pilot read. His expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. He looked down again, read slower, then looked toward row 3, not at the passenger, at his seat, then back at the paper. One attendant leaned in. The pilot folded the paper immediately. Too late, people had seen. One question appeared silently across the front cabin. If the passenger was supposed to leave, why was ground operations coming on board instead? The employee spoke quietly again. The pilot asked something back. The employee answered, short, direct, then left. The cockpit door closed. The pilot remained standing. One attendant asked softly, "Captain?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the passenger. The passenger looked out the window, not waiting, not watching, as if none of this concerned him anymore. The pilot finally spoke, quiet enough that only the first rows could hear. "Who did you contact?" The man kept looking outside, then answered, "No one who can stop the flight." And for the first time, the pilot looked uncertain. The aircraft doors remained open. That alone started changing the mood. Passengers noticed delays differently depending on the cause. Weather creates patience. Maintenance creates concern, but unexplained delay creates attention. And now everyone in the front cabin was paying attention. The pilot stood near row 3 for another few seconds, then turned and walked toward the cockpit without another word. The attendants followed. The curtain closed. The front cabin became strangely quiet. Nobody wanted to speak first. The man in seat 3A remained exactly where he was, phone charging, hands resting, no messages, no calls, no visible interest in what had just happened. Across the aisle, the woman finally asked carefully, "Are you sure you're okay?" He looked at her. "Yes." She hesitated. Then, do you know what's happening? He considered the question, then answered, I think they're trying to understand. She looked confused. Understand what? He gave a small, polite nod, but did not answer. She stopped asking. 5 minutes passed, no announcements, no pushback. Passengers began checking departure times. A man opened the airline app. Refresh, no update. Another passenger quietly stood. An attendant immediately appeared. Please remain seated. The passenger frowned. Are we delayed? Professional smile. We'll update you shortly. No explanation. She disappeared again. People looked toward row 3, not openly, but enough. The man noticed. He did not react. A few rows back, someone quietly started typing. Messages, probably telling someone about the delay, probably not about weather. At the front, the curtain opened. Not the pilot. 2 airline employees entered. Ground operations. No uniforms with rank, no urgency. They spoke quietly with cabin crew. No one approached seat 3A. That detail mattered. If he was the problem, why was nobody speaking to him? One employee looked once toward row 3, then looked away immediately. They disappeared into the galley. 3 minutes later, another person boarded. Different badge, different posture, not operations, corporate. Passengers would not know the difference, but airline employees did. One attendant straightened immediately when she saw him. The man in seat 3A did not look up. The corporate employee disappeared into the front. No announcements, no movement. Another 6 minutes. Passengers started becoming uncomfortable, not angry, uneasy. One of the attendants finally emerged. She moved through the cabin offering water, too early for service. People noticed. A passenger asked, Are we waiting for security? Her answer came too quickly. No. Then she moved on. Nobody had mentioned security. The woman across the aisle looked toward row 3 again, quietly. Do you work for the airline? The man looked at her. No, she nodded. A pause. Then, do you work in aviation? He looked at her for a second, then answered, Sometimes. Same answer as before. She almost smiled, but didn't. At the front of the aircraft, the curtain moved. Voices, low, controlled, no shouting, no visible conflict, which somehow felt worse. The pilot appeared. His face looked normal, too normal. He walked down the aisle, stopped beside row 3. Passengers looked down instantly. He crouched slightly so his voice stayed lower. Sir. The passenger turned. The pilot spoke carefully now, not warm, not apologetic, different. We're reviewing a procedural matter. The passenger nodded. The pilot continued. There may be additional delay. Another nod. Then, would you still be willing to continue travel today? The question landed strangely. The passenger looked at him. Yes. The pilot nodded. A pause. Then, do you require anything? The woman across the aisle looked up immediately. That question had not been offered before. The passenger answered, no. The pilot remained there another second. Then asked, have you made any external report? The passenger looked at him. No. The pilot blinked once. None. The answer came immediately. No. The pilot looked briefly confused. Then, did someone else? The passenger looked at him for a moment, then answered, I don't know. Silence. The pilot stood, returned to the front. Passengers exchanged quiet looks. That changed everything. The questions were different now. Not, who is this man, but why is the pilot asking him that? 10 minutes later, an announcement came. Professional voice, controlled. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Departure is temporarily delayed while we complete an operational review. We appreciate your understanding. Operational review, not seating issue, not passenger issue. Operational review. Passengers noticed. The man in seat 3A closed his eyes briefly, not resting, thinking. Then his phone vibrated once, only once. He looked down, read, locked the screen. Placed the phone face down again. The woman across the aisle saw only 2 words before it disappeared. Received, proceed, nothing else, no names, no explanation. At the front, the curtain opened again. This time, the pilot was not coming out. Someone else was boarding. The person who boarded did not look important. That was the first thing people noticed. No formal entrance, no visible rank, no escort, dark suit, small laptop bag, airport identification worn normally instead of displayed. He stepped onto the aircraft and stopped just inside the door. One of the attendants approached immediately, not nervous, Careful, he listened, asked one question, then another. No expressions changed, but nobody smiled. Passengers watched without appearing to. The man in seat 3A did not turn around. He remained looking out the window. The new arrival glanced once toward row 3, only once. Then looked back at the attendant. That was enough to make people notice. He did not approach the passenger. Instead, he disappeared behind the front curtain. Another 10 minutes passed. The aircraft still had not moved. People began checking connections. Someone asked for timing. Crew apologized politely. No details. The woman across the aisle looked toward row 3. "You really do not seem surprised." The man turned. His expression stayed calm. "I'm not surprised there's a process." She looked at him. "That does not answer the question." He gave a small nod, then looked away. At the front, voices again. Still low, still controlled, not argument, discussion. The kind that becomes quieter when the stakes rise. Then something changed. The pilot emerged, not alone. The suited employee walked with him. They stopped near the galley. One attendant held a tablet. Another held printed forms. The suited man pointed at the screen, asked something. The attendant answered. He asked again, same question, different wording. Passengers could not hear, but they could see the repetition. The attendant finally handed over the device. He reviewed something himself, then stopped, looked at the pilot, asked another question, short. The pilot answered. The suited employee looked down again, then asked for the printed paperwork. Passengers noticed something strange. Nobody was looking at the passenger anymore. Everyone at the front was looking at records. The woman across the aisle noticed too, quietly. "They're not checking you." The man said nothing. A few moments later, the suited employee walked toward row 3, not quickly, not dramatically. He stopped beside the aisle, looked at the passenger, professional, neutral. "Good evening, sir." The passenger looked up. "Good evening." The employee asked, "Would you mind confirming whether you intend to continue travel?" Passengers nearby looked up immediately. That question again. The passenger answered, "Yes." The employee nodded. No request for documents, no identity check, nothing. Then, "Thank you." He turned and walked away. That was all. No one understood. Across the aisle, the woman looked openly confused now. She leaned slightly. "They did not ask your name." The passenger looked at her. "No," she waited. "Then they already know." He considered for a second, then answered, "They know enough." That answer stayed with her. At the front, the suited employee returned to the galley. The curtain remained partially open. For a moment, passengers could see inside, tablet screens, printed reports. Crew statements, one form being corrected, then replaced, then corrected again, no raised voices, just repetition. The pilot stood with folded arms, listening, not leading, listening. After several minutes, the suited employee stepped out again. This time he spoke quietly to the pilot. Passengers heard only one sentence. "That wording cannot stay." The pilot looked at him, then asked something back. The answer came immediately. "Because it becomes a different report." Silence. The pilot looked toward row 3, not at the man, at the space around him, like reconsidering the entire sequence. One attendant quietly said, "We followed procedure." The suited employee looked at her, then asked, "Which one?" Nobody answered immediately. He continued. "Seat verification," silence. "Passenger reassignment," nothing. Then escalation, still nothing. The question ended there. No accusation, no anger, just categories. The pilot looked down. One of the attendants spoke quietly. There was concern. The suited employee nodded once, then asked, "What created the concern?" No answer. Passengers could not hear everything, but they did not need to. People understand tone, and this no longer sounded like support. It sounded like review. The suited employee finally closed the folder in his hands, then said something that nobody except the first rows heard clearly. "Do not update anything else until records are preserved." The pilot looked at him, no response. The employee left the front, walked off the aircraft. No one followed. The cabin remained still. 30 seconds later, the pilot walked out again, stopped beside row 3, looked at the passenger, and asked quietly, "Sir, were you scheduled on this flight for a reason?" The passenger looked at him, thought for a moment, then answered, "No." A pause, then, "But now it may become one." No one spoke after that. The pilot stood beside row 3 for another second. as if expecting something else, an explanation, a title, a warning. Instead, the passenger simply looked back out the window. The pilot returned to the front, this time slower, not defeated, not frightened, careful. The cabin remained quiet. Passengers had stopped asking questions. People do that when they sense they are near an answer. No one wanted to interrupt whatever this had become. 5 minutes later, the aircraft door opened again. Another person boarded, older. No visible authority symbols. No dramatic entrance, but the reaction came immediately. The lead attendant straightened. Ground staff moved aside. The pilot stepped forward before being addressed. The new arrival spoke briefly. No handshakes, no introductions. Then he asked one question. Passengers could not hear it. The pilot answered. The older man listened, then asked, "Did anyone request removal?" The pilot shook his head. The older man asked another question, short. The pilot answered again. The older man looked toward row 3. Only briefly, then looked back at the pilot. His expression did not change, but his next question was slower. "Was identity verification completed before escalation?" The pilot said something. The older man listened, then asked, "What identity was verified?" No response came immediately. Passengers nearby could feel the silence. The older man nodded once, not approval, recognition. He walked toward row 3, stopped beside the passenger. The cabin watched openly now. The older man spoke quietly. "Good evening." The passenger looked up. "Good evening." The older man stood there for a second, then asked, "Are you continuing travel?" Same question. Again, the passenger answered, "Yes." The older man nodded, then asked, "Do you require any accommodation?" The passenger replied, "No." Another nod, no apology, no explanation. Then the older man asked, "Would you prefer to continue without interruption?" The passenger looked at him. "Yes." The older man gave one short nod. "Understood." He turned to leave, then stopped, looked back, and asked quietly, "Was there any intended observation today?" The question sounded strange. Passengers did not understand it. The passenger answered, "No." The older man held eye contact, then nodded once. "Understood." He returned to the front. The woman across the aisle stared for a second, then looked at the passenger. "What does that mean?" He turned. "It means today was ordinary." She looked toward the front. "This does not feel ordinary." He gave a small, polite smile. "No," then looked out the window again. At the front, the curtain stayed open. People could now see more clearly. No one was raising voices. No one looked emotional, but hierarchy had changed. The attendants were no longer explaining. They were answering. The pilot was no longer directing. He was recounting. Documents moved back and forth. Screens changed hands. One employee left and returned. Another photographed paperwork. Passengers noticed something else. Nobody was reviewing the passengers' documents. Nobody had asked again because somewhere someone already had. 10 minutes later, the older man stepped out once more. He spoke quietly with the pilot, then handed him a folder. The pilot opened it, read, stopped, read again. His face did not collapse. It simply became still. The kind of stillness that comes when a person realizes a decision was made too quickly. One attendant looked at the page. Her posture changed immediately, not fear, recognition. The pilot closed the folder, looked toward row 3, then finally walked there himself. No audience tone, no authority tone, just professional. He stopped beside the passenger, lowered his voice. "Sir." The passenger looked up. The pilot spoke carefully. "There appears to have been no irregularity with your booking." The passenger nodded. "I assumed that." The pilot continued, "There are indications additional assumptions influenced the handling." The passenger listened. No reaction. The pilot stopped, then added, "I understand there may be review beyond this flight." The passenger looked at him for a moment, then answered, "Review exists whether people notice it or not." The pilot stood quietly. The passenger continued, "Most flights end before anyone asks questions." Silence. Then this one did not. The pilot nodded once, nothing else. He returned to the front. Passengers remained silent. Nobody knew exactly who the man was, but they understood one thing now: whatever mattered about him, it was never his money. It was that he understood systems, and systems remembered. 27 minutes after the scheduled departure time, the aircraft door finally closed. No announcement explained why. No apology included details, just the standard language. Operational review complete. Expected departure shortly. Passengers heard the words, most ignored them. But nobody in the front cabin believed this had been routine anymore. The cabin crew returned to positions, professional, controlled, nothing visibly different, yet everything had changed. Movements became more deliberate, conversations shorter, announcements more careful. The pilot's voice came through the speakers, steady, normal. Passengers listened differently now. People had heard that voice before, but context changes tone. The aircraft pushed back. Engines started. Taxi began. Row 3 remained quiet. The man sat by the window exactly as before, no special treatment, no upgraded service. No one approached him unnecessarily. No one avoided him either. Everything became procedural, which somehow felt heavier than apology. Across the aisle, the woman finally spoke, softly. "Can I ask one thing?" He turned. She hesitated, then, "Did you know who those people were?" He thought for a moment, then answered, "Some of them." She looked confused. "And they knew you?" A pause, then, "They knew what they needed to know." She looked at him for another second, then asked, "Was this because of your work?" He looked out the window. "Not directly." That answer seemed final. She nodded, did not ask again. During climb, cabin service began, normal pace, professional, but the small details changed. No unnecessary conversation, no assumptions. One attendant approached row 3, not the lead attendant, someone else. She stopped beside him. "Sir, would you like water?" He looked up. "Yes, thank you." She handed it over, nothing unusual. Then she quietly said, "If you need anything, let us know." Not apology, not performance, just neutral professionalism. He nodded. "Thank you." She left. The woman across the aisle noticed, not because of what was said, because of what was not. No explanations, no excuses, no emotional repair, only corrected behavior. The rest of the flight passed quietly. People slept, read, worked. But every so often someone looked toward row 3, trying to solve the story, most never would. Halfway through the flight, the pilot made another announcement. Whether arrival time, nothing unusual, then one additional sentence, short, professional. "Thank you for your patience and cooperation today." That was all. Passengers heard it. No one reacted, but some understood who it was meant for. The man in seat 3A continued reading. No expression, no acknowledgement. Hours later, the aircraft landed. Taxi, gate arrival, seatbelt sign. People stood immediately like every other flight. Overhead bins opened. Normal life resumed. The man remained seated, not intentionally, just not in a hurry. Passengers began exiting. The woman across the aisle collected her bag. Before leaving, she looked at him, then quietly asked, "Will something happen?" He looked at her, considered the question, then answered, "Something always happens." She waited. He continued, "Usually people just never see it." She nodded, then left. The cabin emptied. Crew stood at the front. Professional smiles returned. The pilot remained near the cockpit. The man stood, removed his carry-on, smoothed his jacket once, walked forward. No one stopped him. At the aircraft door, the pilot stepped slightly aside. Their eyes met. The pilot spoke quietly. No audience, no performance. "Safe travels." The passenger nodded, then said, "Thank you." He stepped into the jet bridge and kept walking. No assistant waiting. No cameras. No dramatic reveal, only a phone vibration. He looked once. A message, short. Initial preservation complete. Review opened. He locked the screen, put the phone away, kept walking. Behind him, crew would write statements. Records would be matched. Timelines compared. Video requested. Procedures reviewed. Questions asked that no one had expected when boarding started. Not because a billionaire was offended, not because someone powerful demanded consequences. Because once systems begin recording, they stop caring who expected to be believed. The man never looked back. By the next morning, another flight would leave from the same gate. Passengers would board. Announcements would play. Routine would continue. But for a few people, seat 3A would not feel ordinary again. End.